Hello and welcome to the Automovie podcast, the only podcast that talks about cars in films and TV and YouTube and all that good stuff. Later, we're going to be comparing two films that sound kind of the same, but first...
It's such a, honestly, I'm going to interrupt straight away and say this is such a contrived pair of reviews.
It really is.
For reasons that will become apparent when we get there. But first, what have you been watching?
Well, before that, let's do our little Today in History, because today, in 1976, Giugiaro added the additional syllable to the front of their name, previously having been just Garo. This was swiftly followed by the D in Didion, the extra A in Saab, and 7 of the Fs in 9FFFFFFF. Today in History.
What have we been watching?
I've been to the cinema again. I went to see Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Ooh,
and
I'm interested.
I went to see it on opening night at the IMAX up here where I live. And it was Children in Need night. And the first thing I saw when I went in were 15 people dressed in Ghostbusters cosplay raising money for Children in Need. The crowd was rather partisan, shall we say.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've really come to... They're not going to be going, oh, no, this is rubbish. They're not going to be judging it objectively, are they? If they arrive in a rickety Ecto-1 and jump out with proton packs on their backs, then...
There were the, original Ghostbusters proton packs. A couple of them had got the big tanks from Ghostbusters 2. It was deeply impressive. So, Ghostbusters Afterlife... I went in knowing almost nothing, so I'm going to be very, very unspoilery. I am a huge Ghostbusters fan. I've bought it probably on about as many formats as I have Back to the Future, and this really excited me for many, many reasons. One of them primarily being that this is part of the same universe as the 1984 film and the 1989 film, and it's directed by Jason Reitman, the son of Ivan Reitman, who did the first two films. The story is basically this family who are evicted from their apartment go to this creepy house that this woman's dad left her, who was a Ghostbuster. It was Egon's house. None of this is a spoiler. This is all in the trailer. And her daughter, so Egon's granddaughter, starts doing sciencey stuff and they start experiencing ghosts and so on.
What does this have to do with cars, Chris?
It has Ecto-1 in it. And
is that as far... You've basically just crowbarred a movie review into here because it's got Ecto-1 in it and you just want to talk about Ghostbusters.
What I will say is a couple of things. Yes, primarily. If you like Ghostbusters...
Watch Ghostbusters. It's really good. Still, it's one of the funniest movies of all time.
It is. But also, Ghostbusters Afterlife, the more you know the original films, there are so many Easter eggs. And you honestly get those moments when they pull the covers off the Ecto-1 not knowing what it is. And they find, the jumpsuits and the proton packs and all this sort of stuff. There are some twists towards the end. If you don't want to know anything, if you want to go into it cold, avoid any reviews or spoilers or discussions, because the ending, honestly, there were some manly coughs and dry eyes towards the end. There were not dry eyes. That was the thing. It is, if you like Ghostbusters, it is glorious. I think if you know nothing about Ghostbusters, I think there is an interesting kind of young adult Harry Potter type thing to it.
Spoiler alert, Dumbledore dies.
Seeing Ecto-1 blazing around these small town streets with a gunner seat hanging out the side. Again, this is in the trailer. A trap that's been mounted on an RC chassis effectively racing off. There is some properly good movie, not chasing, but there are great car sequences, and Ecto-1 is really a character centre of it. If you like it, go. If you like fantasy adventures and you know nothing about Ghostbusters, go. If you are going to think, oh, well, this is just, it's not a reboot, they're just cashing in, there is a lot of cashing in. There is a lot of nostalgia. Some people are cynical. The reviews have been a bit mixed, I think. I loved it. You should go and watch it if you like Ghostbusters. If you don't like Ghostbusters, still go and watch it. It's great. Also, on completely unrelated, there was a YouTube video that Top Gear put out. Now, I love behind-the-scenes videos. I absolutely adore them. Because I don't think, in a lot of circles, Top Gear gets the credit for the cinematography and the work they do that goes into those films, because they are stunning.
I don't think they ever get the credit. I don't think people who watch Top Gear realise how much hard work goes into it. I really don't think, chinless wonders on the internet criticising every episode and saying it's, the same old formula and it's all scripted, have any clue how much hard work goes into making the visuals they see, let alone all the rest of it. This was a really eye-opening clip to see exactly what it takes and how long it takes.
There was one scene that really, I think, crystallised just how much effort goes into Top Gear, where they were shooting an insert clip for the review of the Hurricane STO, and there was the external scene was this car going past the camera car and rah, bah, bah. So what they did in the studio was that they revved the nuts off this Hurricane. So the engine was rocking on its mounts. I think they either opened the lid or took the engine cover off, and somebody was waving a light back and forth as though light was passing over it. And when you watch the actual sequence, it was less than a second, probably. But in that moment, in that sequence, it was just that moment of, here's the car, here's the outside, here's the engine, here's the spray, here's the driving. And it adds so much to it. And I would still to this day love to know what the budget is for an episode of Top Gear, because my God, they put the work in.
They do, I think. And this is the difference between something like an episode of Top Gear or an episode of the Grand Tour and anything any YouTuber or collection of YouTubers do. They just don't have the budget, and they really just don't have the time to put in to creating this kind of content, to putting that level of detail where they take the thing into a studio and do that kind of shot just for a less than a 1 second insert. But the whole thing cut together, gives you visuals and a feeling that you just can't really replicate on a quick run and gun on a manufacturer launch or on a track day or on a Canyon Road or something like that. And that is not to do down all those amazing YouTubers that we bang on about all the time and that we watch constantly, but it goes to show what full on pro level shoots can involve. When you've got the budget and you've got the time, and even then they probably don't have enough money and enough time. They're always working to a deadline and to a budget. But it does really reveal the depth of effort that goes into those visuals that after a while, especially if you watch a lot of it, you can kind of just gloss over and go, yeah, it looks brilliant. So what? And I hope that isn't the case, that every now and then I kind of stop and go, holy cow, this looks amazing. And I've banged on about this before. If you go back and watch the Harris LeBlanc era of Top Gear, where they did 2 or 3 really great features together. I'm thinking of the Bentley Continental GT one they did, which starts at the top of a mountain and goes all the way through, and that looks astonishing in 4K. It's so beautifully shot, so crisp and incredibly cut, and I just think people don't notice. And maybe that's, the sign of a really great job, is that no one compliments you. If you do a bad job, then that's when they notice. But I thought this was a really interesting watch. And so if you have ever wanted to know what it takes to put together one of these review segments for Top Gear, this is just absolutely essential watching. The next item we've got on our show notes is a thing I haven't watched. It says, The Grand Tour presents Carnage à Trois. I'm sure the internet is awash with boring, same old crap.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell us about it, right?
There was a Twitter thing that the Grand Tour did earlier, which was possible alternate titles, one of which was Coq Monsieur, which just made me chuckle. This is, from the trailer, proper Top Gear silliness. I was going to say it's a loving tribute. I don't know how loving it's going to be. From the trailer, this isn't a great adventure. This isn't a challenge. This isn't a single narrative. This is more like on Top Gear when they did those like 20-minute bits about they're trying to find the best SUV for caravanning, and they get sort of 15 identical SUVs, and they're just...
Oh, yes. That's the one where they keep taking things to the tip.
Yes.
And it does end with a very, very amusing chase through somebody's giant land with two rapidly disintegrating caravans, which is one of my favourite latter-day Top Gear pieces. It's gloriously destructive and brilliant.
So it's going to be entirely in that vein. I think it's going to be a bit of knockabout fun. I'm hoping that it's good, frankly. Unfortunately, speaking of Franks, since the last recording, in fact, very recently to us, we've had the passing of Frank Williams, who, if you are of our age, which is 40, loomed large over the whole F1 scene when we were at our most formative.
Well, that's the thing. Williams, at the time of getting into F1 for me, were just on the brink of becoming the team that won everything. They were basically what Ferrari were in the 2000s and what Mercedes have been in the 2010s, and particularly the teens of the 2010s. Williams had the best car and the best tech, and they had frequently gifted but not brilliant drivers that just won because they were in the best car. And because you and I probably both watched F1, watched Damon Hill kind of take over from Ayrton Senna after his accident. And so at that very impressionable age, a Williams in blue and white with a Canon logo on the back or a Sonic the Hedgehog on the side or whatever just became the vision of a Sunday afternoon. And that is what everybody thinks of when they think of Williams. And I guess I also think of those brilliant 2002, 2003 BMW engines in slightly less than brilliant Williams cars. And, Juan Pablo Montoya being JPM and just wandering around the place, being absolutely brilliant on track and not giving a flying fuck off the track. And basically kind of almost squandering his talent because he just didn't care enough to try a bit harder. He could have been champion in 2003 were it not for a very questionable FIA decision against Michelin's tyres. But I remember Williams as being, the 90s glory days and the early 2000s, frequently on pole, but just not quick enough over a race and being beaten by Schumacher. And then it all went down the shitter, let's be honest. And with a brief cameo from Mark Webber, who should have been a brilliant Williams driver, but one of my less liked things about Williams is the way it treated its drivers, not just Webber, but Hill, Villeneuve even, Mansell, Prost. There wasn't a great deal of love for its drivers. It was seen as, well, you're all expendable, we've got the best cars. And I've had a love-hate relationship with Williams ever since they dropped Damon for 97, just because I hold a grudge. And, friends, people listening to this will know I hold a grudge and we'll be laughing about this. But I must admit, seeing Frank Williams come into the paddock, I guess it was a couple of years ago, and Mercedes did a piece where Lewis Hamilton drove him around in a Mercedes. And I think Frank joked that he'd got 1 lap and 2 minutes to try and convince Lewis to sign for Williams, which I thought was a wonderful gag. It's not going to happen, but he's still wheeling, dealing, even at his advanced stage there. And he hasn't looked well for years. And since they've sold the company to Dorito Capital and stepped away from the limelight, I have had in the back of my head that I wonder how sick he really was and how much he was holding on to make sure that the team was in well-funded, capable hands, and that everything he'd built wasn't just going to fall down again. And it looks like it's not. And all credit to Dorito Capital. It looks like they're not only brilliant at making potato chips, they do appear to be giving it the backing. And Williams are not last on the grid anymore. Very luckily for them, we've got Haas for that. Sorry, Gene Haas.
Very much the American Minardi.
Yes, but again, we know this has got nothing to do with cars on YouTube. But I'm sad that he's gone. I'm glad that the team lives on in his name. I think everyone's had a chance this week since the news broke to kind of go back and relive their favourite Williams moments. And, you know, for me, it's going to be Damon Hill winning his title in 1996. It's going to be watching two Williams drivers in the best car by a country mile get absolutely mullered in Donington 1993 by Ayrton Senna in a McLaren. But, you know, those cars were so fast the rest of that season. And, you know, watching two brilliant cars with two reasonably good drivers, one of them very, very, very good, get just murdered. But, you know, that was always comedy. Any number of Juan Pablo pole laps, although I think that one that held the record for the fastest average lap time until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the Monza one.
Yeah, maybe Kimi took it off him. But yeah, that Monza one I'm thinking of. I remember watching that live at the time and being gobsmacked. And I loved that era of Williams. And I was always so sad when inevitably the cheaty Bridgestones and Schumacher genius would always prevail in the race, and it made me so cross. You know, look at what he's achieved. His team name still lives on, and I must admit, I've dived back into the F1 TV archive to watch a couple of my favourite Williams races. Again, I'm sure I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but if you pay something like $6.99 a month to get live timing with F1, you also get access to the TV archive, which is worth its weight in gold if you want to go back digging. It's definitely worth it. Live timing when you're watching the F1 broadcast can sometimes make a dull race more interesting. Not always, but sometimes. If you like watching a table full of numbers that go from white to yellow to green and occasionally to purple, and sometimes I am that person, then it can make a race around, you know, Monaco or Hungary more interesting. But more importantly than that, it gets you access to that F1 TV archive, and I do recommend going back and looking at that. Although, as I think you're about to say, there was a pile of tributes posted on podcasts and on Twitter and on YouTube.
So there was very, very quickly a very good tribute on the F1 YouTube channel, which was narrated by Will Buxton but written by Sarah Holt, and it was I think a really, really fitting tribute. And if you only watch one, and there's going to be so much at the Grand Prix next weekend, it is next weekend, isn't it? I don't know, whenever it is. Sorry, yes, the driver press conference was being recorded on my Skybox as we started recording this. So, yes, it is this weekend. There's going to be a lot of tributes, I think quite rightly. It did make me think about the episode we did where we actually watched the Williams documentary and the McLaren documentary as a double header, because I think it's easy in these situations to lionize somebody who... The Williams documentary in particular, but also the Beyond the Grid podcast that Claire Williams did, I think gave a really fair summation of the man, especially the documentary. And please, if you're interested, go back and listen to that episode, whichever one it is. But having his, even then, late wife telling her side of the story, Frank telling his side of the story, Claire being incredibly open about the family life.
It's episode 8. Famous racing names.
Wow, was it that long ago? Yeah, go back and listen to that. But I think while you see all the tributes, I honestly don't think there's a better tribute than finding on... you can buy it or rent it from Amazon or a lot of other places. I don't think it's anywhere sort of free, quote, at the moment. It is well worth a watch in Frank's honour, and just getting the story of what those years were actually like from the inside. Well, before we get on to the news, what are you drinking tonight, if anything?
Well, tonight I have Nika whiskey from the barrel. 51.4%, and this is a blend, double matured blended whiskey from the Nika Whiskey Distilling Company Limited. This was a present a few years ago, and I haven't really had all that much of it, so I was looking down my thinning collection. I need to stock up, and thought, I need to have something different, so I'm trying this. It's good, it's not great, but not bad. I think that the problem is you can't get good Japanese whiskey for love nor money at the moment because they ran out. That's simple as that. They ran out of decent whiskey because they didn't think anyone would want it, and they were like, "Oh shit, we haven't got any 12-year-old or 15-year-old or 17-year-old or anything. They've drunk it all, and we haven't made any more, and now it's become fashionable."
Do you know who that was a present from?
No.
Me.
Are you sure?
Yes, I bought that for you. Lent me a camera lens for an extended period of time, and that was my thank you to you.
Well, there you go. And like I say, I have had a quarter of it. So it's not always been a go-to, but it is actually pretty nice.
I am doing some consumer advice.
What are you drinking? Because
I've got Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Rye, which, as Marty will now verify, comes in a very, very pretty bottle.
It's a square bottle. It has a red label.
Yes. If you like Jack Daniel's, or you're buying a present for somebody who likes Jack Daniel's, the Single Barrel is a very good, decent proof version of the things you can buy for a tenner on Father's Day. As we speak, Jack Daniel's Single Barrel is down from £47 to £25 on Amazon, and if you buy it and give it to somebody as a present, they will go, ooh. Shall we go to the news? So The Drive and Donut Media are now part of the same group. Seamless there. Do you ever watch Donut Media?
Only very occasionally. When the algorithm, with a capital A, recommends me something, I might watch it, but I don't watch a lot of it, I must admit. Much like, even though The Drive is a huge website, I don't tend to visit it all that often. No. When I do, I read through a ton of stuff and then I'm done again. I don't check back on it regularly unless somebody happens to link to a piece on it.
I was looking through the Drive story, which is the nearest I think you'd probably get to a press release. So the Drive gets more than 10 million readers every month. Donut Media, which started with one video, was it 10 years ago? Not even that, 6 years ago, has now a whole network, effectively, with over a dozen shows and nearly 6 million subscribers. The one thing that I find really interesting looking through this story is that they want to relaunch or rekindle? What was the word they used? But basically pump some energy back into the Drive video offerings, which is one of the better things I've heard of recently.
It's interesting because, if you think about a whole bunch of the YouTubers that kind of get you watching automotive content on YouTube, it's Matt Farah and... for me, Larry Casilla and obviously Chris Harris, with his Chris Harris on Cars thing that all came out of the Drive network way back when YouTube were funding lots of creators with that creators program, and they all got together and put all these things together. And I'm still watching videos from Chris Harris, although on a different channel, and I'm still watching stuff from Matt Farah, although it's his own podcast stuff and channel, and I'm still watching Larry Casilla clean cars because I'm an OCD nerd. And I'd love to see them bring through a next generation of automotive talent if they could do that, not just get the same old people doing the same old stuff. I've got that already, and I like that, and I want them to stay where they are. I'd like them to bring on a new generation of people to do stuff. So there is a good chance that this could be great. I will have to watch it and see. What's next up here? You've got a bullet point that says Hammond's Workshop YouTube technique.
All the behind the scenes here, yes. Hammond's Workshop, have you watched it?
I have not.
I have.
Is it good?
Yes. I can see why it's on Discovery Plus. It's absolutely that Discovery Shed sort of vibe.
I think this is going to be a Christmas viewing thing for me. I'm going to need to watch it because I love that Discovery Shed vibe. I've talked about it before with those Mark Found, was it? Doing A Car Was Born and all of those.
Mark Evans,
sorry. Who's Mark Found? That must be somebody different. I think that might be something to do with railways. Either way, I love those series. Car is Born, a Land Rover is Born, or a 4x4 is Born, whatever it was. So if this is anywhere near that kind of tone, I'm there for it.
So this is, I would describe it as the British Gas Monkey Garage And I will explain that.
Another thing I don't watch. I'm not cool enough to watch these things because I don't drink bourbon. I can't watch American shows.
So the premise of this series is it's always like, oh, Richard Hammond's opening a workshop. It's a bit more than that. So there was a father and son working out of a shed in Hereford, restoring classic cars, but the facilities were old. They did great work. They weren't really that well known. And Richard Hammond sort of I think he had a Jaguar and something else restored by them. And he went, actually, these guys could be great. So what they did was effectively took these two guys, their skills, their experience, and then Richard Hammond kind of brings his name and his identity and his he's the kind of like the marketing guy. So he's like that Richard Rawlins sort of character. The arc of the series, and I think it's like 6 episodes or something.
It's not long then.
No, it's not that long, but it's essentially going from where this all starts to getting to a point where they've got a new workshop and there's work coming through, but they're really honest about the finances. They're really, really... Richard Hammond has this thing where basically he's taken these two guys and said, you've spent 25 years building up a business. I'm going to help you take it to the next level. And in the process puts a lot of his own money into it. There isn't the volume of work coming through to sustain the business. And it's kind of them finding out, and particularly Richard finding out, like, how do you run a business? How do you go out and get customers? There are things, and it really weighs on him that this isn't a thing, this isn't like a project where you just sort of come in, you do a thing, and then you go. It's like, these two guys are trusting me with their life's work. And I've got to, make it work as a business, because if it goes bust, it's affecting them as much as it's affecting me. I think there are some interesting kind of hard lessons. I think there are the realities of business don't always line up with the dream of business. And there's also a really nice undercurrent of Richard Hammond going, I've spent the last 20, 30 years, whatever it is, living out of a suitcase. And if I go and do a job, I vanish for 2 weeks. And then I come home and I see the kids and I see the family. And then I go off for another 2 weeks and do something else. Whereas now I'm at home. I'm going out to work in the morning. I'm coming home in the evening. And you kind of see a bit of the family dynamic of them sort of going, okay, well, how do we kind of, as a family, deal with this? What's that like? So I think there's plenty of scope for it to go on and go forward. And I think it will be an interesting series to watch. There has to be another series. I think it's too soon in the story to stop. One of the things that I did watch, though, before I watched the series on Discovery Plus, was there was some Drive Tribe behind the scenes videos about Richard Hammond and about filming the show. It really, really struck me. And I know it's really easy to go, well, yes, it's Richard Hammond. He's the guy off the telly. To see him in a situation where somebody goes up to him and says, right, we're going to do a piece for YouTube about the cars that you're auctioning. So what I want you to do is just go around the cars one by one and tell us about them and what they mean to you. And he sort of goes, okay, well, do you want me to start here? Do you want to start here? Is the lighting right over there? Okay, go. And he can talk brilliantly off the cuff. He is such a professional when it comes to the ability to talk and be engaging, be relaxed, be authentic, be off the cuff. Whether it's, Grand Tour, whether it is Discovery Plus, whether it's a YouTube video, he has that ability to just be charismatic and quick and make everything seem like it's scripted when it's not. And it's one of the things that really made me think, because we watch a lot of YouTube, I think it's fair to say. And yet I wonder how many people actually get any form of training or guidance in how to present stuff.
I don't think they do. I find it's an interesting point, because if you start watching a channel early on in its life, It's you kind of watch that progression from awkward in front of the camera, but doing it because I'm excited about trying something new. Rare is the person that comes along like an Ed Bolian type who is a fully formed character who just happens to be in front of the camera. It takes someone who is already a proficient public speaker or who has that persona, like a salesman, which Ed Bolian was, or like a radio DJ, which is what Hammond did before moving on to television, becoming a broadcaster and a journalist before going in front of the television. Where if you're a live radio DJ, you need to be able to speak with clarity and with authority without saying and and he's had 20 years of making television to hone his craft. And your average YouTuber is not going to have those skills. And I'm interested to know whether or not they develop those skills as much as, they might be flogging Skillshare licenses or, talking about how they spent forever editing this thing in Final Cut Pro or whatever. But do they actually try and present better and so on? I was talking about the art of presenting something on YouTube and explaining things, and there's a few channels I think that really do a great job in explaining, particularly if it's like stuff where you're working on a car and it's mechanical stuff. Legit Streetcars. Alex from Legit Streetcars is brilliant at taking something that looks horrifically complicated, like undoing a Mercedes hydraulic suspension system that is running at 3,000 PSI and troubleshooting it and making it seem like that's just something you could do. It's just him in a garage with some tools, and he makes it seem completely natural, and he's talking and he's very knowledgeable, and that's a gift, and I don't think every YouTuber has it. I think some of them are better than others. I think if you were to watch someone like Sam Crack, who seems to most of the time be trolling his audience and not actually committing to making good decisions and buying good cars and doing good work, I think half the time he's just doing it to piss people off. But then look at someone like Tavares, who's getting better and better at presenting, taking on more and more ambitious projects, but equally is probably putting out fewer videos than he ever has because the projects are getting bigger and bigger, and the amount of time needed to deliver them to the required quality, both for the videos and for the actual car itself or the build itself or the series in the case of Car Trek, means there's more work behind the scenes. And I think they're starting to learn that lesson. If you look at something like the upcoming Matt Farah thing, All Cars Go to Heaven Season 3, that's probably starting to take on the aspects of one of these smaller broadcast TV shows. Anyway, what we've talked about way too long before we get to our tenuously themed reviews.
Yes. Why don't you start us off with Drive?
I've been wondering whether or not we should review this movie for a long time because of its title and because of the profession of the principal character, who is known only as Driver. He doesn't get a name or any real kind of backstory. So this is a 2011 movie called Drive. It's directed by a director called Nicholas Winding Refn. Stars Ryan Gosling as the titular driver, along with a pretty starry cast, to be honest. You've got Bryan Cranston in there, hot off of Breaking Bad at the time. Carey Mulligan, who I think this was quite an early role for her. I remember her best as having starred in the best episode of Doctor Who, The Weeping Angels.
Yes, and an Education, which was very good.
Yes, she did that, and then An Education, for which I think she was Oscar nominated, and then she did Drive, and she's since gone on to do a whole bunch of other stuff. She's astonishing in everything she does. But there's also Albert Brooks, Ron Perlman, who is a proper, hey, it's that guy, makes every movie he's in 70% better. Oscar Isaac shows up, sort of...
Wow.
Kind of very slight, I want to say pre-fame. I don't know if that's fair. It's a hugely starry cast. Christina Hendricks turns up as well, and she's fantastic. It's a really starry cast for a movie that was made for, I believe, something along the lines of $15 million. So Ryan Gosling is a stuntman turned getaway driver. He's a Hollywood stunt driver who is perpetually got a toothpick in the corner of his mouth, looking cool in a bomber jacket with a scorpion on the back. He by day, he's doing stunts. He's doing rollover stunts and doubling for Hollywood stars. And by night, he also works for criminals as a getaway specialist. He's very clever at driving. He has an interesting rule where he's like, you've got me for this 5-minute window. And whatever happens before that doesn't matter. I turn up, you've got 5 minutes with me, and then I leave. Which makes no sense in the context of getting away, because what if it takes 6 minutes to get away from the police? Does he just drop them off and drive off? I don't know. I have a feeling that may have been something that was in the script and sounded cool. It starts off with what in any other director's hands could easily have been like a whiz-bang car chase with loads of sliding and shots of cars barreling down alleyways and so on. And it's the exact opposite of that. This is art house car chase. This is like, what if Baby Driver was cooler and none of the driving was shot from outside the car and Baby Driver never said anything and there was an 80s synthwave soundtrack? That's what this feels like. So you've got an opening car chase where he's driving a pair of robbers who've robbed a place, trying to get away from the police. He's got the police band on the radio, and everything is shot from within the car. There is no exterior shot of the car doing anything. There's no drifting. There's no nothing. It's all done inside the car, concentrating on the driver himself and his movements, his where he's looking, how he's planning to outwit the cops. It's a totally different approach to a car chase. And it's very stylish. It reminds me very much of like early Michael Mann in the kind of... There's a bit of heat in there in the way that he's picked bits of LA that you don't normally see to shoot in. After that kind of mega intro, you meet the driver doing his day job, being Hollywood stuntman, and then you find out that his next door neighbor is this... I want to say single mum. She's not a single mum, but I'll come to that in a minute. But she's a single mum with a little boy who looks up to the driver, and her husband is in jail, and he reappears, and the story kind of takes a turn. It starts out of this kind of very kind of sweet platonic relationship between the driver and this next door neighbor, Irene, who takes a shine to the driver, who's taken a shine to her little son, who's very cute. And then her husband comes out of jail and immediately reads the driver as being a crook and says, hey, you know what, you can be the driver for this job, which goes wrong. And then the film takes a total pivot and it goes nasty, and it turns into a proper noir. And to be quite honest, there's bugger all action in it to do with cars. There's no reason for this film to be on this podcast whatsoever, other than the fact that it's called Drive. There is a moment, and we're going to go into this because this is what we do. There is a moment where the driver is being effectively, he and his kind of fixer, the guy that gets him all these Hollywood jobs and also gets him all of the criminal jobs and the getaway driver jobs, is also trying to go straight and set up a business where they buy a NASCAR and they're going to run around like local... I guess, I don't know. I don't really understand how NASCAR works, if I'm honest. Sorry, Americans. They do like local races first. So, I don't know, very small ovals and then slightly bigger ovals and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And, the plan is this guy's so good at driving, they're going to use him as the driver. His criminal partners basically front the cash to buy this NASCAR. And when the guy is talking over what a great bargain this was for $300,000, and he even describes the slick tires as having plenty of tread, which for some reason stuck with me. Like he's going, like it's a regular car that's got nice big deep, it's got 6 mil tread, it's not going to fail its MOT, while pointing at a slick tyre that has no tread. But like I say, this is not Six Underground. This is not Baby Driver by any means. There's no gloriously cleverly shot car chases or anything. It's such a character drama, and it's a noir character drama. It's very cool. It's full of brilliant, quiet, beautifully acted performances. I'd say it's worth a watch. You might find it a bit too art house, you might find it a bit too pretentious. But I've really, really enjoyed this. It's a proper mood piece. And this is the movie that got me into synthwave, because the soundtrack is astonishing. The soundtrack is like 80s Europop, and well, I don't think it was even called synthwave then, but it's basically that kind of 80s style synthesizers with frequency modulated synthesis and big drums played on drum machines with lots of reverb, but with modern production techniques, so far more crisply recorded and mastered. Honestly, just go to Spotify and type in synthwave. But, listening to this soundtrack got me into all manner of synthwave bands like The Midnight, FM84, Carpenter Brute, LeBrock, Gunship, Comtrues. Honestly, it's one of my favourite genres, and that's because of listening to this soundtrack. It's a brilliant soundtrack. The score is done by Cliff Martinez, who used to be in Pop Will Eat Itself, which is a band that's from very close to my hometown, but has since gone on to become a very in-demand Hollywood soundtrack author, has done loads of stuff you'll have heard of, and his soundtrack is just as cool. But it's hard for me to go on and on about this movie with, car related stuff in it, because there's just none there. There's NASCAR, but it is totally secondary to the plot point. It's in it for like 5 seconds and it's done. There's car chases, but not like you've seen them before. And so it's all character driven and internal, and they take that with the camera angles as well. All the interior driving stuff was shot inside using a rig they call the Biscuit rig, because they developed it for a film called Seabiscuit.
Oh, yes.
I have a feeling this is like the precursor to the kind of driving rigs you see now, where the driver is on top of the car, controlling the vehicle so that the actor inside can appear to be driving the vehicle, but is actually, can do their acting, as it were. And that is acting in the Team America World Police. Use your acting. No, that's unfair. This is a great movie. I enjoy watching Ryan Gosling in almost anything. He's really, really good, but he's excellent in this. Carey Mulligan takes a part that's quite thin. It could be in the hands of a lesser actress. It could be nothing, and she makes it something. It's worth a watch. It is not our usual stuff, and the only reason it is in this review is so that we have this following tenuous link from a movie called Drive to Chris's review. We're going to go into Overdrive.
Oh, very good. It's almost like we've planned this.
Oh, by the way, I must say, we're really sorry about that. It was a dreadful gag. If you're not a fan of 80s drenched neon art house movies, then we apologise. We just wanted to do a silly joke about going from Drive to Overdrive.
Overdrive, a film I hadn't heard of until quite recently, when friend of the show Matt Lange said, oh, Overdrive, it's an awful film. It's like the worst car film ever. And I thought, interesting challenge, because we have watched some fairly awful films on this podcast. So I thought, right, let's watch Overdrive and see how bad it is. The plot of it is two half-brothers steal a Bugatti Transatlantic, which is very famous. They steal it having just come from an RM Sotheby's auction. And they steal it, but it's been bought by a shadowy figure who is a crime boss. And he pulls them to his compound and says, you've messed with the wrong person. You've got to go off and steal me this 250 GTO, otherwise I will kill you in a week. And one of them was like, oh God, this was going to be my last job. I was going to retire and have a life with my wife. And the other one goes, when were you thinking of telling me this? And he goes, I just did.
Amazing scripting. I could not think of any better way to say that.
Exactly. And they have to get a crew together, and there are problems that have to be overcome. There is a climax where one of them thinks they're going to be killed by the baddie. One of the brothers' girlfriends gets kidnapped and is threatened unless they do their thing and get the car. And
is there a moment where a man with no hair wearing a white vest says something to another man where he says, hey man, he was in my face, and the guy goes, I'm in your face. And then the camera cuts back to the man with the potato face, but with the other guy's face in his face.
Nothing nearly that witty.
Tuna sandwiches.
There are no tuna sandwiches.
Overnighting parts from Japan.
No. Oh, right. Let's get onto the cars. So this is... we have to kind of pick this apart on several levels. So it stars Scott Eastwood, son of Clint, who has learnt to do the what's it called? Not the wincing, the kind of the
Squint.
That's it. That's the extent of his acting range. It's filmed so it's all set in Marseille. It's got the guy who was Alex Dimitrov from Casino Royale playing like the crime boss of Marseille, and it's like, this is my town. And because it's set in France, like, it seems to have been funded by about 12 different production companies, and they've just raided other people's car collections. So Alex Dimitrov, I can't remember what the character's name is. He's just that guy from Casino Royale. He's like, come on, say to these two brothers, like, come with me, I will show you many beautiful things. And he shows him this car collection where the production company has obviously gone to a car collector that somebody in the crew knows, and they're going around sort of like, oh my God, you've got a Shelby Mustang. Is that a 69? No, it's a 71. Is that one with the 4-speed overdrive? Yes, it is. Oh my God. Is that the 1942 Alfa Romeo 851 that Ascari drove in Monaco? Yes, it is. Wow, that's amazing. So they just cram in all of this stuff to try and make it into a car film. It's a little bit about family. It has a crew who has to go and do a thing, and there's a twist. They have to go and steal a 250 GTO. Good news, the crew found a Ferrari collector, so when they go to that garage, there's a 250 GTO and an Enzo, an F40, an F50, some other red things. And
sorry, Matt.
To get the crew. Oh, no, it honestly, they've just gone to some collector like Chris Evans. Not Chris Evans, because I think he sold them all, but somebody sort of gone and said, do you mind if we borrow all of these Ferraris? And they've gone, yes. We put them in a white room? Yes. And then it's like, we're going to need drivers. Don't worry, I know the best drivers in France. 4 people turn up. I think 2 guys, 2 girls. They turn up in a 997 3.6 GT3, a Mini Cooper, possibly a Works, a GTR, and a Honda Civic Type R. Why? We don't know. Do we ever see the cars again? No.
It's to prove that they are authentic petrol heads. And to be fair, turning up in a 3.6 GT3 does show taste.
It does. And yeah, it basically plays out the way you would think a kind of a heist film would play out. It's worth pointing out at this point, actually, if you look at the cast and crew, there are no names you will recognise. There's that guy from Casino Royale. He's like the biggest name in it. The 2 writers have written 2 other films I have watched. One is Too Fast, Too Furious.
The worst Fast and Furious movie by a country mile. And even that is that's a low bar anyway, but come on.
The other is Wanted. And have you ever seen Wanted?
I have. This is
James McAvoy, Angelina Jolie, Morgan Freeman.
And Chris Pratt turns up, doesn't he? He plays a character in there.
Does he?
He does. I think he's the boyfriend that steals what's-his-face's girlfriend.
Oh, God, it is, yes. Yes, who's the kind of the idiot. If you haven't seen Wanted, it is a fairly awful film.
Bullets can go round corners.
Bullets can go around corners. You can slow down your perception of time and do amazing things. But this is a fraternity of assassins, and the front for their organisation is that they are weavers. And the way that they find their next target is via the Loom of Fate, which is not me making it up. It is literally called the Loom of Fate. And by looking at the stitches that the loom creates, that gives them their next target. That is far cleverer than anything you will find in Overdrive. Scott Eastwood is trying to be the kind of combination of like Nick Cage in Gone in 60 Seconds, a bit of Vin Diesel. You know, in Scott Pilgrim, when you've got, what's his name, playing Lucas Lee, Chris Evans.
Yes.
And he's playing that guy in a leather jacket who's such a big star. That's what Scott Eastwood is trying to do and failing miserably. He has all the charisma of a soggy cardboard box, but he can wince.
Isn't he in the Fast franchise? Isn't he wasn't he in Fast 8 or something? He was the sidekick to Mr. Nobody, and he was rubbish and everyone mocked him all the time.
I think we need some immediate research on this. What's he known for? He was in Suicide Squad, Fast and Furious 8, playing a character called Little Nobody. How appropriate. Yes, he's been in a lot of stuff. Obviously, none of it memorable. The rest of the cast are largely interchangeable. They go through every sort of thing. You can kind of map it. Somebody's watched Ocean's 11 and gone, we need somebody who's good pickpocket. We need somebody. So like the first time you see Scott Eastwood's girlfriend, she's typing things into a terminal window on a laptop. Therefore, she has computer skills. These are never addressed again for the rest of the film.
She is elite hacksaw.
She absolutely is. Here's the thing. If you were to kind of draw the dots of a heist film, these hit all of those points. It does it without any style, without any cleverness. It has no charisma. It has driving sequences which are largely decent. But going back to what we were saying earlier, the problem is you can find better stuff in an episode of Top Gear. You can find better stuff by Grip Productions or Tangent Vector or any of these production houses that we now know who do great car-to-car driving content. That Vaughn Gittings Jr. video of him going down the ring, or the P1, when it spits at the bit of rubber when it's going around Anglesey. All far better than what you find in this film. There are some car stunts, so there's like some Mark 1 Focuses chasing. They have to prove themselves in an airport, so they drive what would it be, like a 3 Series Cabrio and a mid-level 6 Series for some reason. And they're being chased by these Mark 1 Focuses, and there are some stunts where there's obviously an air cannon that flips one of them, and another police car drives into a concrete barrier, and the back skips up and it flips end over end. But the problem is it's not bad. This is the thing. Superfast is bad. I found Talladega Nights bad.
I have to admit, I seem to remember in our huge rewatch of the Fast and Furious series, which probably is episode 30 that would have 2 Fast and Furious in. Although it's stupid, it's ridiculous, and it is by far the worst of the series, it's still fun. I still like being around these characters. It still has funny moments. It still has memorable moments. I haven't seen Overdrive, but I have just loaded the Rotten Tomatoes reviews page for Overdrive. So before Chris rounds this one off, I'm going to share a couple of choice reviews. This one from the critic of the Los Angeles Times says, quite a few times in the plastic action splat called Overdrive, characters say to their antagonists some variation of, you must think I'm stupid. I'm sorry to break it to you, Overdrive, but all of you is stupid. Or Marianne Johnson writes for Flick Philosopher. That must be a movie review website. She says, more plot holes than plot. This overly convoluted, deeply stupid Fast and Furious wannabe is crammed with cliches and memorable only when it's laughable.
Yep.
However, there is somebody who, filmjerk.com, claim that this is not a great movie, but quite a bit of fun and better than any of the Fast and Furious movies they've been making for the last decade. Ooh, not sure I believe that one. But yeah, there's the most telling thing on the Rotten Tomatoes thing is it just says audience reviews for Overdrive. And then there's just a line that says there are no audience reviews for Overdrive at this time. It gets 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's crap. Although I did notice that it's got Ana de Armas in it, who is a decent actress. So she must have been slumming it in an early role.
Yeah, So she is the girlfriend, and she is basically like the Jeopardy, the class in it. As I say, it's not a bad film. It's just like a Fisher-Price heist film. It's all of those cliches, all of that, if you sort of drew your sort of first draft, it was like they kind of submitted that and they went, yeah, let's do that. And it's like, no, like it needs a polish and it needs a better twist and we need actors that actually have some chemistry and charisma. And they went, no, this will do. I rather appropriately actually had an email from Amazon because I rented it from Amazon Prime. And whenever you get anything from Amazon, you always get an email from them. And I got I'm trying to quickly find it because the wording of it was, the headline of it was, "Did Overdrive meet your expectations?"
No.
Well, my expectations were low and they were met, basically. I think it's... Here's how I best sum it up. If you look at IMDb, and again, take these figures with a grain of salt, the budget was an estimated 24.3 million euros. So, sizable.
More than Drive. The opening weekend in the US, guess how much? 2 million?
$4,797.
Oh my God, that is a hell of a flop.
However, the total gross in the US, $7,793.
Oh, wow. That's not good. Did it make anything up internationally? Did the French go crazy for it? Did the man with the big car collection invite all of his friends to see it?
No. The worldwide gross was $9.6 million on a budget of 24.
There was another movie that we reviewed that had like that incredibly... I can't remember what it was. It was quite a recent one that had a reasonable sized budget and then didn't make any of it back. And we were wondering then...
Superfast.
Is it Superfast? Who's willing to just pump money into something that is just so dreadful? From what you've said, it just sounds like an average kind of photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy action movie. But that's some tragic box office. By contrast, Drive was made for $15 million and made $80-something million, which is a huge return on investment. It's nothing in action movie terms, but it got so much critical acclaim. It got Oscar nominations. It got Cannes Film Festival awards. It's huge. It made a lot of movie reviewers top tens of the year, and I think it has a following. If you like art house, if you like mood pieces, it's a great movie. And this is not that. We just slung it in there so that we could have that stupid gag. So there we have it. Drive and then Overdrive.
There is one redeeming feature about this film. There's one thing that they got right. The running time is about 90 minutes. And that's it.
It's short.
They got in, did it, got out.
Well, there we have it. Drive and then into Overdrive. We went into Overdrive, but we discovered, much like I think one of those Top Gear things, was it James May had a car that just had an overdrive gear knob, but didn't actually have overdrive in it.
Was that the Lamborghini Miracle or something?
I can't remember, but one of them just maybe it was Hammond's Triumph Dolomite in the British Leyland film, where it had an overdrive gear knob but didn't actually have an overdrive. I think that's what we've done here. Anyway, let's move on because we're talking about movies that probably people shouldn't watch.
Let's talk about something that they should.
Yes, Henry Catchpole. What's he been up to this week? He's been driving a McLaren 720S GT3X.
Yes, which is a car I like very much because it's for fat businessmen who like to drive racing cars that can't actually compete. Henry Catchpole doing what he does very, very well. Basically being strapped into a £700,000 McLaren race car and talking as he drives. I think, what can you say? It's typical Henry Catchpole. It's very good. It's very charming. I think it's an interesting car explained well. This
car has done the rounds. Top Gear have had it for their Speed Week. They've done a feature in it, which was, I think, a slightly bit more whiz-bang than his Henry style. I really like this because there's a moment halfway through where he says, let's do a POV onboard with McLaren driver Ewan Hankey because I think it's cool. And he's right.
Yep.
It is cool. And you go and you watch the pro driver drive it beautifully all the way around. And, when the tail end steps out, he applies the corrective lock in one motion and then just waits for the car to sort itself out and gathers it up and off he goes. And it's glorious. It's brilliant. I thought this is the sign of, this is the high quality that you get with a production team like Henry and his Carfection collaborators. They don't have the budget or the time of a Top Gear or a Grand Tour. If they did, they'd be able to produce content that is easily as good. This was beautifully shot, probably done on the run. They had probably barely any time, and it just doesn't show it whatsoever. I thought this was a really slick, beautifully made clip that needs more views. People go and watch this. It's really good. Even though they're only making like 15 of these cars and you're never going to see one, it's still really cool.
Also, we mentioned in the last episode...
before we move on, my favourite thing about this video, other than the Ewan Hankey POV and just Henry's general demeanour and the whole thing, is when you watch the screen as he goes, it tells him that he's on engine map 12 and then it switches to a little graphic that says "Go baby go." On the screen of your £720,000 not GT3 racing eligible McLaren, somebody has put a clip from what I think is nicked from Armageddon, where in the truck that lands on the Meteor and jumps across a canyon on the Meteor, the gear lever has a light on it that says "Go baby go."
And that is why you listen to the Automovie podcast. We mentioned in the last episode, actually, that Carfection have been doing a lot of good content recently. One of which was George Collado driving and reviewing the Ginetta G56 Academy car, I think it was, because they kind of all have vaguely the same name. A car which, although it's quite old, now looks like the rear end of an F8 Tributo. I think the back of the Ferrari just looks like a Ginetta. Anyway, he basically gets into a car as a guest driver, reviews it during the race, and you follow him through a race weekend. And he's not one of the best presenters on there, but his ability to drive in a race, in a foreign car, talk, get on the podium in his class...
That's got to be applauded. Can you imagine if, let's say, Max Verstappen was a completely different human being with charm and poise and presence? Can you imagine him, leading away in his cheaty bendy wing Red Bull and just reviewing the car as he drove along while the rear wing flexed and his traction control system stopped the wheel spin and his front wings drooped and his cheaty engine gulped in more fuel than it's allowed to. Not that I'm implying that any of this is happening, but of course it all is. Anyway, yeah, it's like watching... I watched a bit of this and thinking, yeah, this would be like, I don't know, Colin McRae reviewing his Focus WRC while hurling it down a stage in a Welsh rally or something.
But no, it'd be more like, you remember when Colin did some like one-off appearances for Citroën, and he basically like would turn up. And they'd be like, Colin, please, you're Zara. And that was the first time he drives it.
He did I don't know if he did a whole season for them. I think he might have done, because he finished second to Loeb on the Monty and then was nowhere for the rest of the year, because by that point Loeb had already ruined rallying by going, no, there will be no drifting. Everything must be done in straight lines. And he'd already gone in like filled with McRae's diffs to remove all the drifty. And McRae was like, I don't know what to do with this thing. It just drives around corners. I don't understand. Does not compute. And was pretty much nowhere for the rest of the season, apart from that one Monty where clearly Loeb didn't have time to rush around and did sneak in a differential in the back of McRae's car where normally there's just a big solid axle.
Length of scaffolding tube between the two wheels.
I'm being very facetious. But yes, it would be like that, jumping into an unfamiliar car and just reviewing it. I'm sure Harris could do that kind of thing and probably does do for a lot of these TV things where he jumps into a racing car that he's never driven and then gives us his thoughts in 10 minutes. But I really enjoyed that. I thought it was quite fun. Like you say, Carfection have been doing some interesting stuff. Alex Goy's done a piece on the Ferrari Dino. It's got a short little 7-minute film on the Dino, which I thought was a lovely little tale. So yes, do check them out. Let's quickly skip on to YouTube pick of the show. YouTube pick of the week. What's your video pick for the episode?
So my video pick is from Haggerty, it's Jason Camisa's the new 911 GT3 is the most important Porsche of them all.
Strong words.
Very strong. But what he does, which I think is really, really good in this episode, is it's not just about the new car, because that would be kind of easy. But what he does is he drives the entire GT3 lineup up to this point. So I think it's at some Porsche facility or some like experience center in the US, but he basically sort of goes, here's the 996. Here is what's great about that. Here's the 997. Here's what they changed. Here's how it affected it. Here's what they did with this. And he actually drives each car and kind of puts each one in context. So there's some stuff towards the end where he's basically just doing like hot laps in the cars, but like the first sort of 15 minutes or so is like a really nice, well-researched, insightful view of the GT3 lineage, basically up to this point. And I think the reason why it really struck a chord with me was there has been a podcast from Collecting Cars.
I was going to wonder if you were going to bring this up. Andy Proniger is on the Collecting Cars podcast with Chris Harris, and it is easily their best podcast episode today. And there have been some big names on that podcast. Nikki Grist springs to mind with some great tales. But this is just a stunning insight into what it takes to develop the GT3, how it came about for the 996, all the way through. For those that don't know, Andy Proniger is head of GT cars at Porsche. He's the man that started out driving them and saying what a GT car should be, and he's responsible for some of the best cars. And there's an hour and a half podcast where he just talks through his career, and it is riveting stuff. So I'd highly recommend that. We're on one podcast, recommending you go listen to a far more famous podcast. But I do want to check this out. I liked Jason Camisa a lot. I really enjoyed his stuff with Motor Trend when he did head-to-head with, who am I thinking of? Johnny Lieberman. And then he was replaced by Jethro Bovingdon, who has now gone on to do more stuff with Motor Trend. I would love... I haven't seen this. I really want to now because it sounds really interesting, and I haven't watched Jason Camisa do something in a while. So this sounds like something to check out.
It's kind of interesting listening to the podcast, knowing GT cars as we do, which is to say in limited passing. What's really interesting is that Andreas is really good at the stories and the idea behind it and why we did certain things, why that model is different from this model and how they evolved it from one to the next. But I think listening to it, because we haven't driven the whole lineup and we don't know them intimately, it's quite a nice companion to actually sort of go back and remember not only how we think of them now, but how they were thought of at the time as well. And I think both of those are good examples of that. My channel, I have to thank a listener for this. Tim Wilkes got in touch with a channel called Making for Motorsport, which I love. It's now just something that I think is perfect. It's a great example of what YouTube does, which is one guy effectively how to use technology to go faster for less money. And it's quite in-depth in things like 3D modeling, 3D printing, building an ECU, making inlet trumpets for a throttle body on a 3D printer. It's really getting into the sort of the nitty-gritty of a very specific bit of manufacturing. And it's not a Bad Obsession Motorsport where it's welding stuff and grinding stuff and making brackets. This is much more the kind of the more modern, the more sort of technological end of things. And it's, if you like that sort of stuff, if you have an interest in it, if you have a curiosity in it, you can fall down a rabbit hole. And it's really good, accessible, interesting content from somebody who's really engaged in it. And it's worth a watch if that sounds like it tickles your pickle.
What a wonderful turn of phrase. My video choice is from a channel I think I featured on the podcast a long time ago. It's called Scarf and Goggles. They do a lot of stuff with land speed record stories. I love land speed record cars. I love land speed record stories. So something popped up in my timeline. This is about Henry Seagrave's sensational land speed record car called the Golden Arrow. And if you know anything about land speed record cars, this car will jump into your thoughts immediately. It's this sort of Art Deco style land speed record car with huge rounded Michelin tires that look nothing like the kind of thing you'd see now. And
oh yes,
it is like the archetypal, if it's not, you know, if the archetypal land speed record car is the Bluebird, this is like the second one along, and the gold reminds me very much of the gold that Thrust 2 was painted in the mid 1980s, and it's a wonderful story. It's really well told. It's it's very nerdy. But I think loving land speed records requires you to be a bit nerdy. This is a really well told tale, really well presented with a bunch of fantastic photographs of the story of Henry Seagrave's Golden Arrow car. So please watch it, and then check out all the other stuff on Scarf and Goggles, because it's really, really good. And for my channel, I think we might have featured this one before too. Chris, I think, maybe called them out a few episodes ago. This is Driftworks, and I have not watched any of this stuff until like 2 weeks ago, when the algorithm recommended me a video about Phil's Lamborghini. And I knew of this car because people I follow on Insta know Phil from Driftworks and featured his, I think Al Clark made a small video with this Lamborghini Murcielago that had been extensively modified and sort of dropped and made as this Writer GT1 tribute car. And I just went, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to watch this. And I watched one of them, and then I just kept watching, obsessively watching every one, going, I can't believe this. And there's a part of it that is, I grew up in the Midlands. You wouldn't know it from my accent, but I grew up in the Midlands, and they're from Birmingham, and they're in a lockup on an industrial estate, which is like any number of industrial estates I went round as a kid. And they're doing amazing things in a dirty, freezing shed with bits littered around the corners. None of this is like the channels I follow in the US. And I mean, even, someone like Tavarish's big old unit has got cars everywhere, but it still seems clean and neat and tidy. Whereas all of these sheds have got grotty roofs that probably, the only reason they don't have asbestos dangling on is that it's already fallen off already. It's always cold. Doesn't seem to see what time of year. They're always cold. But the people involved are working miracles with materials to make 3D printed velocity stacks, or make brand new suspension adapters. And there's Driftworks, and then there's sort of, I guess, a business that I think is next door, Dino Talk, that does a lot of the fabrication,
which is even more brummy
and even more scratty, and yet they've got unbelievable material skills, welding skills, fabrication skills. The workmanship here is absolutely top drawer, and it's being done by a man in a scruffy shop that's just got cack littered everywhere around it. And I say cack, I mean that affectionately. It's like, there's an engine there, and there's a pile of scrap there that actually turns out to be a bunch of chassis bits, and so on and so on. And I watched all of the Lambo stuff across a series of days, just marveling at the fabrication skills and the ambition, and seeing how it all came together. And then there's Phil's V10 M3, which he built years and years ago, and I think was magazine featured, and then he sold it to somebody in Germany, and then he goes back and rescues it and comes back and restores it. And the restoration process is unbelievable, like taking all of the sealant off the underside of the body to fix all the problems there, and then reseal it with new stuff. And it's amazing. And then quite recently I watched Craig from Dino talk about putting an LS4 supercharged engine in a first gen Aston Martin V8 Vantage, and I want one, like, really badly. I love the V8 Vantage shape. I love the V8 Vantage sound. I think it's glorious. It's a shame that they're actually quite slow and people don't seem to like them very much, although they're really expensive at the moment. But I would love to have like a total sleeper that has a supercharged LS4 in it, because it sounds evil and it will do 11s all day long and is putting out something like 560 horsepower at the wheels with a very mild tune on it.
Wow.
And again, workmanship in installing it is astonishing. They've got wiring looms. They've made everything work brilliantly with the dash. You know, they say themselves, although I think they gloss over some of their expertise sometimes, they're talking about how everything has to work. It has to work perfectly. Otherwise, it's not usable. So they've integrated, you know, the crate engines, electronics are all integrated with the Aston electronics via some kind of CPU magic. It's an astonishing build. I recommend you go and look at Driftworks and all of the videos on there. There's some really amazing stuff on there, amazing workmanship, and it was such a refreshing change after watching so many of these US centric build videos, and especially some of the stuff like B is for build, where ambition can often exceed ability in some instances, or things are done to look cool but aren't maybe necessarily thought through from a functional standpoint. Everything that Driftworks do has been, even though it might look like it's a bunch of brummies slinging stuff together in a workshop, it absolutely isn't. It's the exact opposite of that, apart from the brummy thing.
One thing that I will say, and we talked several times about people on YouTube being able to be themselves and be on camera as themselves, rather than, you know, presenting or writing a script or trying to be something that they're not. They recently did a video that was the first time Phil drove his 992 GT3 at Donington with Al Clark in his 996.
And they spent the whole thing going sideways. And yes. I spent the whole video going, how have you not been black flagged and thrown off?
But I love that they can make a video that is... And I mean this with the greatest respect, because I know that it's not an easy thing to capture, but it comes off effortless in the way that they're filming it and they're chatting, and it's two mates at a track day.
Yeah, it's one of the best two mates at a track day videos I've seen. And I think Phil says on quite a lot of these videos that it takes a long time to edit these, and he tends to downplay how good he is at editing, but they're really brilliantly edited, and it's a joy to see. And you know, he's like a lot of people who with car collections that I know and respect, in that he drives everything. He wants to buy stuff and he uses it, and I mean really nails it. I think the video I watched with him getting his GT3, and he went and he was just about to tick over the limit where you can redline it, and literally that like 2 miles after he ticked over the 953 mile thing that says, right, now you can take it to the red line, he's like, right, well, we're going to go and take it to the red line.
I have to say,
I love
the last one of theirs that I watched, which I think was him outlining his bargain CSL, which I would have walked to Birmingham to give him 50 grand for if I'd had it. I was literally watching it, the video in one screen, and on my other screen I was like browsing the Driftworks merch, thinking like, that hood is quite cool and I quite like that t-shirt. And it's
I know, like... I bought t-shirts as a result of watching the video, so you know what, it works. It's cool. I've looked at buying bits from Driftworks, but at the moment I don't have a car to put them on. But even when I did have a car, it was not really the kind of thing that would fit on my car. But if you are in the market for some particularly nice wheels or suspension components or other stuff that they stock, then you should check them out. Although I don't think they need us to shill for business. But the Driftworks channel is brilliant, and it's homegrown. It's the exact opposite of the kind of very sometimes overly clean and meticulously prepared videos you get on YouTube about car modifying and so on. It's such the opposite of that. It's the opposite of something like even Mighty Car Mods, where it is two guys who just love doing this, but they present it in such a clean way, and their workshop is somehow messy and yet tidy, whereas I can't say that about the Driftworks unit or the Dyno Talk unit. But I've gone on about this so long now. We've gone on a record amount of time, but I love it so much. Please go and watch it.
Definitely.
And with that brings us to the end of episode 47 of the Automovie podcast. Please like, share and subscribe and all that good stuff. Leave us a hugely positive review if you were so inclined. If you thought our gag about driving to Overdrive was particularly terrible, we apologise once again, but we have to base an entire episode around a cheap gag.
Like, share, subscribe.
Yes. We're going to do another one of these before Christmas? We might manage to squeeze one more in, a Christmas special before...
Maybe we need our end of term where you put down your World War II poetry and whatever else you used to do at school, and we'll watch Ferris Bueller again or something.
Yeah, we'll come up with something, but I think we might squeeze one more podcast in before the end of the year, certainly. But for now, we are going to hop into our American muscle car. We're going to sling on a jacket made of silk with a scorpion on the back and cruise off into the LA night, listening to Synthwave.